Okay. So Snort is one of the main ones that you mostly will be referencing or hearing about. And what is one of the key aspects of Snort or most of the intrusion detection systems? So we have four that are on here as far as the different types. Which one would Snort actually fall under? Would it be
behavioral based.
You sure?
Well,
It was until you said that.
it's most of them do it by what's anomalies, but they also have the behavior.
Okay, so the signature-based one is the one that Snort is most associated with. Actually, how I remember this, we'll bring up our presentation here, and if we go through and do some little thing here, generally I like to call it the BASH, and that's an acronym for all of the different types of behavior that you wind up having within your intrusion detection systems. Okay, and so that is relative to behavioral-based, anomaly, signature, and heuristic. And we'll talk through what each one of those is here in a moment. But the ones that most people have seen in the past is signature-based. And so what that means is there's very specific types of things that they're looking for in the traffic, which requires that the traffic is unencrypted at your location. Okay? So it's okay that it goes encrypted between endpoints, but once it gets into your enclave, you need to make sure that you've downgraded it so that you can take a look at it. And we'll talk about some of the details of that here in a moment. Okay, so once again, the behavioral-based one is there's a baseline that's set up. And what that means is if you know that you are a financial institution and you're always talking to other banks and you have a set type of protocol that you're communicating with, and then all of a sudden you start to communicate with maybe other countries that don't have the financial institutions that you're looking for, or start to communicate via protocols like a torrent or something different that's not usually known, then what we wind up having a situation there is where you're now outside of that baseline, okay? And so the behavior has now changed. As far as anomaly, it's kind of the same thing. If I know that port 80, what is port 80 kind of traffic? Okay, so your web-based traffic. If I know that web-based traffic, there are very specific types of commands that are used in those. So let's talk about a few of those here. What are some of the HTTP protocol commands that you may be familiar with? What's that? No. That's not one of them. But what's one of the main things that you do when you request a web page? What's the name of that command? Okay, so we have what's called a GET. Okay, if you post something to a web page, what's the name of that command? Huh? Okay, a post. You also have some of the more generic ones where you have just the head, where you're just looking at the top piece of the information available and so forth. So there are specific commands that are focused on HTTP traffic, and if we see something that's outside of that nominal baseline for the protocol, then we know that there's something not right. So if we now see traffic over port 80, and it keeps coming in, and over the course of 5 or 10 minutes, we don't see gets and posts and heads and all of these other commands, well, then somebody's sending another protocol. They're sending something through port 80 that is outside of what the protocol should be. So as a result, that's where the anomaly-based detection comes in. Okay, so that's outside of the protocol baseline. Okay, next is signature-based, which we've already talked about. So you're looking for a specific type of activity. So what we're going to do here is we'll talk about how, like, Snort, for example, actually goes through and takes a look at that. It will break a packet up into its component parts, and then what you'll be able to do is compare that to see if you wind up having that type of information. So let me bring up Wireshark real quick. Has anybody used Wireshark at any significant amount? Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to go online here. And I'm going to show you a resource that you can use. So what we're seeing here is, if we take a look at the CloudShark application, we can bring it up and actually take a look at the different pieces of the protocol and how it's structured. And the thing about signature is you can go ahead and go back and pull up one of these packets and take a look at it real quick so everybody kind of gets an idea. And what you're going to see here is all of the details of how the protocol works and the type of information that's provided to it. Okay? And it's going to go through and it's going to tell you stuff about ports. It's going to tell you about which protocols are being run over it. It's going to tell you the type of data that's transmitted between entities and so forth. So why these signatures are really important is because it can take these packets and it can look very specifically into them to identify if there is an issue, or if perhaps there's something that's already been seen in the past that indicates that there's malicious content on it. Okay. All right, so let's go back to the final one, which is heuristics, which is something that's been developed over the years in terms of algorithms that kind of put parts and pieces of all of these different types of intrusion detection system types together in order to take a look at what's going on. Okay. And then lastly, if you wind up having a scenario where you are actually making some modifications within the system directly, that means that as soon as you see something coming from, say, the Czech Republic that you know may be negative, you can go ahead and actively block that content as soon as the alert hits. Okay, and Snort can be configured to some limited capability in order to prevent some of those activities. But there are a lot of very interesting application filters as well as web application filter activity that can be modified based off of that. All right, so anybody have any questions about that? A couple of different definitions that you should be made aware of is if you go in and you take a look at the different types. Hold on one second here.